Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 16 transfer plans. We're still in the middle of Game Week 15 in a sense. There's still one more game to play, and I am, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, pretty invested into this game. So, as you guys know, we obviously made a move 2 weeks ago to go Mbumo in, Richards in, which has kind of meant that I went off of the Munoz path, and it's let me get Mbumo as a differential. And the weird thing within the midfield landscape, I think, is I'm actually struggling to shop for midfielders, and they're pretty pathetic, all of them, in terms of creating like a 3-5-2. But when I think about the game, all the forwards are just worse. I still like Mbumo. Ironically, I want him for next week too, but he's going to get price falls. I don't think I'm playing this game for price falls. A lot of the midfielders that I want to go into are also dropping in price. So players like Semenyo would be a good example of that. And I think people are also, like from a casual perspective, people are overreacting to the AFCON piece because it's very likely that someone like Abuma will play in Game Week 17 as opposed to be benched in Game Week 16. So that's frustrating for me as an owner because I think this little button that FPL has created will obviously kind of exacerbate some moves. And I don't even know why great job with the UI this year. We do know it's Brian Mbumo, but all the information that's supposed to usually come when this is gone. I do think it's helpful because this is the whole point, right? You're giving information to people. You're making it easier for them to play without having to resort to social media platforms, watch videos, watch my videos. And that's totally fine. But I think that is creating price pressure on Mbumo, and it is interesting how that's impacting me. Just a separate thought. But yeah, I think when I think about it, okay, I missed 29 points in Munoz. I did get Richards, I suppose, who I think got 9 and 6 or 7 points. So I'm obviously down a lot versus Munoz. And I was thinking this week, if I owned Munoz and probably went for Foden anyways a bit earlier, I definitely would have got the Foden points in the previous week. I probably would have kept Semenyo in my team, and I won't own Mbomo. And I would have got the auto sub today for Dewsbury Hall, but that's probably way too much thinking about that move. It has burnt, and I can be honest and say I'm doing very well still in FPL. 49 points with 2 to play, I think, is going to be a green arrow no matter what, unless obviously I get 2 reds, which is possible, but unlikely. And I'm pretty happy with the team that I have, right? All things being said, Dewsbury Hall looks absolutely fantastic. I kind of made a note about this on Twitter, but I watched Bournemouth versus Everton for 90 minutes and missed the 9 goals between City and Fulham, which obviously was played at Craven Cottage. But yeah, I mean, I actually really enjoyed watching Dewsbury Hall play deeper. Keane coming back into the side obviously helps, not having to see so much of that. But I think he's just an exceptional player. And the interesting thing is I think we have so many players at this price point in FPL that are all very interesting for different reasons. Like, and something I'm going to be looking at with the cheat sheet where I think, within the 3-5-2 structure, as long as you can kind of rotate a fourth defender with someone like Dewsbury Hall for the poorish games, I mean, you're very happy sitting pretty like this in a structure in a 3-5-2. I just don't think the forwards really provide enough value in the game, especially at the minutes that they kind of play. So yeah, I've got Boomer this week. I feel like next week I can just quickly show you what the team looks like. I mean, other than, let's say, playing Dewsbury Hall versus Chelsea away, I think this is a really strong team. I can upgrade it, though, and that's the whole point of having 5 free transfers. You can make these upgrades, but what I'm trying to say is I don't like selling for this week. Even if he's going to take another price drop, I think I'm just going to have to stomach it because it's a good game. It's a home game, and I'll take my chances with someone like Mbumo, especially with, for example, like someone like Sade being out. The Liverpool game being versus Brighton, so not exactly the best fixture in the world yet for Liverpool. Even though we've already come through a lot of them and gotten 0 Virgil van Dijk points. I won't actually spend too long talking about Virgil van Dijk. Anyone who owns Virgil van Dijk knows what it's like. It's kind of like watching everyone, start off the same position and do better than you in life. Yeah, we own Virgil van Dijk and we still do. We've owned him from Game Week 4. And he hasn't moved, He's at 6 million somehow still. And yeah, not much more words for Virgil van Dijk there. Anderson was kind of dismaying. I don't think I would have played Richards versus Lacroix, so it's really just a 1-point net. Do I care? Not really. The win this week was getting Dewsbury Hall, starting him. That's pretty. So there's nothing else to be said. From a Raya perspective, that's another blank for him, and I think you just kind of have to be honest with, when you look at fixtures, and it's very fortunate, right, in the sense that things have fallen in this sort of direction, because obviously I could have gotten hurt by it, right? In game week 13 and 15, Arsenal had their worst fixtures in this fixture run, and they lost their clean sheet both times. But I feel like that's in the truest sense good decision making, in the sense that we didn't own too many Arsenal players for these fixtures. Now we can own more Arsenal players, as they face some slightly worse teams. Like, even the away fixtures in the distance are not as bad as, I would say, Chelsea away and Arsenal away, right? Even Bournemouth away, probably the toughest fixture maybe of the run, although Everton's form is pretty scary. I just think from an attacking point of view, who would I be more worried for? Maybe still Bournemouth, I would say. But yeah, I mean, generally, I think good run for Arsenal with the context that they're one of the best teams. But yeah, like when I think about obviously some of the fixtures that we had from game week 4 and beyond, like 7, 8, 9, these types of runs. I mean, we've had games that were tough, and Arsenal were able to clean. It's just, I do think there is an absolute impact of, is the team getting run into the ground collectively as a whole? Yes. I mean, like, most of Rice, like, he's become a bit of a DEFCON monster, because I think Arsenal have put themselves under a lot more pressure in recent weeks. And it's actually kind of forced Declan Rice to play much more of a defensive role. Like, a lot of his bits are not, winning duels in the midfield and then, let's say, creating an attacking play. It's almost he's doing a block. And then suddenly that leads to, more defensive contributions, because he's having to make these last ditch tackles, whatever that's been needed. And then even sitting in positions where, of course, if someone makes a block, he's in the position to, kind of advance the ball, recover the ball, that sort of thing. If there's sort of like a second rebound, that sort of thing. So the game is interesting. I think Arsenal are slipping a little bit as a team, but that's probably fixture congestion related, and softly the impact of the double center backs gone. But I still think they're the best defense country. And I have to say, respect Aston Villa, because they played really well recently. And of course, a lot of people say, they've been on an absolute tear. But I think, I'm an underlying data man. And they weren't posting good results when they won a lot of the games. Like, I've watched Aston Villa a couple of times. I mean, Tottenham, they scored 2 screamers, really, versus Tottenham. Versus Bournemouth, when they scored 4, you had a free kick goal. And a penalty miss, things like that. Like, the results almost look too good to be true. And then I suppose the irony is, now that they played 2 tough games on paper, which would be, let's say, Brighton and Arsenal, they did amazing in those. They had great underlying stats within those. They're very impressive. So I think if I had to do a bit of a fixture review, within my own kind of feeling about the game, just before I kind of close off on my team, I think my team's in a great position. Even Virgil van Dijk, I think he can be sold, but then, who for is the question. And I just think when you look at Palace, who are probably the most impressive defensive team that we have, that I'm already invested into, they still seem like a team where you wouldn't feel too bad about selling Palace until maybe picking them back up in game week 18, right? I think 17 and 16 actually look like tough games. I think you kind of have to give respect to Leeds. They've looked like a pretty good attacker as of late. And I think because we have 5 free transfers, it kind of just says you should be going for aggressive. So in fact, instead of doing the whole traditional, you've got players for 6 to 8 game weeks at a time, I'm almost shopping for my team and thinking, can I own this player for 1 week or 2 weeks and sell him again in 2 weeks' time? I think that's kind of what we need to be thinking about in FPL, if you think your team's in a good spot. Otherwise, of course, if you don't think your team is in a good spot, get the players who are going to have a good set of games, like a Bruno, for example, won't be disturbed by AFCON, but might be disturbed by the fact that his right-hand side is completely gone and the rest of the team is kind of mediocre. Players like Dewsbury Hall, Anton Stack, should be playing most of the games going forwards. Foden, of course. Even Saka, to an extent, where when you look at Palmer, who's probably the only competing pick at this sort of price point, I mean, what can you get from Palmer? I think his minutes will be really poor, because he's going to have to get eased in. He's going to have managed minutes over this period. And Chelsea's fixtures are tough. In defense, in a few weeks' time, I think we want to shop for Everton players. So when I look at Dewsbury Hall's fixture run, for example, as soon as this, two-run game of Chelsea away and Arsenal at home are over, you probably want Everton players. I want maybe a Tarkowski, and maybe if I don't want Tarkowski, I want at least Michael Keane in game week 18. As long as, let's say, Branthwaite's not too close to coming back, I think this is kind of worth it. So this is sort of how I feel about the game at this moment in time. I think we should be looking at short-term moves, and we should be comfortable making short-term moves as long as you're able to keep the majority of the free transfers rolled. Anyways, let me just do my quick game week 15 review. I thought Aston versus Arsenal, I kind of explained that already, so I've almost covered that segment. I think, look, Watkins has looked pretty good the last two games. There's obviously still matches, especially when he has to manage it. What seems to be like the injury that Emery talked about that he's been struggling with this season, on top of just midweek football that he's not going to play maximum minutes. And I think at the price point that he's at, I probably still wouldn't be looking at Aston Villa and Watkins. But Cash is certainly the most interesting player from that team. He was on my free hit 2 weeks ago. He's probably the one pick, as I said, who makes the most sense because I don't think Rogers really produced that enough from an attacking perspective to really justify as a permanent transfer. From Bournemouth and Chelsea, it's nice to see that Bournemouth can get a defensive clean sheet. Clearly, I think you can probably say that this Chelsea side is struggling without Caicedo, just in so many different sort of ways. They played, I would say, the full first string side this match, as opposed to, let's say, in the midweek match where they rotated a bit more versus Leeds and kind of got absolutely destroyed. Bournemouth had a lot of chances this game, and I think even looking back to picks like Semenyo still looks absolutely interesting. In a landscape where you're struggling to find mids that do good, players like Minte have tough fixtures on the horizon. The menu still interests me, and from a Game Week 17 transfer perspective. So that's the only thing I'll say from there. Senesi still looks like a good pick too. Truffe's obviously been fantastic, but Chelsea's defense also, to give respect to them, I mean they've done pretty admirably so far. As we said, though, that the fixtures will get worse, so it's a question of whether they can kind of hold up these sort of numbers going forwards, which I tend to think that they will struggle to. But I mean, they've already gotten a lot on the board. So if you've owned Chelsea players like a Chalobah or a Sanchez over this run, you're absolutely laughing. Everton, Forest. I mean, I've always been very cool on Forest, even post managerial changes and things like that, just because I just don't think they're that good. Last season they weren't a good team from an underlying perspective. I don't think much has changed. Like, there was a patch of form. They had some decent results, which included, I guess, beating Wolves. But in reality, I still think they're way too overpriced because of the overperformance of last season. So players like Gibbs White don't interest me. The defenders certainly don't interest me. It kind of makes it hard to want to invest into a team like that. Everton were great, and Dewsbury Hall's been great. So very, very fortunate, as I said, to own Dewsbury Hall. He's a fantastic pick, and I'm looking forward to owning him in 2 weeks' time when I get to start him again, because I'm not going to play him versus Chelsea and Arsenal. But there's a lot of picks now in the game that are at really good price points. And going back to Everton in 2 weeks' time, Tarkowski, Keane, their defense is looking pretty solid. Like, some of the recent results from an XGC perspective are much improved compared to a few weeks ago. Because at the start of the season, it seemed like we were saying that they were attack tilted, losing a little bit in defense. Now it feels like, especially with that United game, I think being that cornerstone game where you're getting a clean sheet, 10 versus 11, playing the full match effectively in that sort of game state, and just not really conceding a lot of chances. The block was fantastic. Players like Grealish and Dewsbury Hall were able to kind of control the ball at certain situations, and everything is kind of ticking. But Njai will leave, right? So Njai will leave for AFCON, and that will kind of worsen the team a little bit. Barry's been able to score, so I think that's a positive. He's actually started a couple of games in a row, and I think maybe he's on potentially penalties over Njai. I think maybe a Dewsbury Hall or Grealish could take, just because pedigree and all that. But they're an interesting team where from Game Week 18, I think we definitely want to shop there. City, Sunderland. Sunderland actually could have scored twice in this game. I watched this game. I thought City made some huge mistakes. Like, I remember Ruben Diaz let Isidore in on a 1-on-1. And then right after that, I think Granit Xhaka hit the post with the kind of left foot half volley from memory. Other than that, I think City had that usual game of where they actually controlled the match for close to like 85 minutes of a game. I don't think that Sunderland really had a chance here. And City looked really solid. And Cherki was incredible. Great Rubon assist too. This was one of his odd starts recently, and I think he deserved for sure. And he played well. Like, he lost the ball a couple times, but I think one of the things that Pep will have to just think about is when I play someone like Ryan Cherki and he does lose the ball and he's less, more control oriented like Bernardo, is that something that I'm willing to sacrifice, right? Because it's probably going to be someone like Cherki's much more creative, much more proficient from an attacking point of view. But do those one or two lost balls mean that we suddenly lose that one goal? And do I feel threatened by playing Cherki in future matches? I think that that's a problem. And that will be the issue with Cherki's minutes going forwards. But for other players, like Foden's fit and firing, I have to say, I'm actually shocked people thought that City would rotate for this game unless there was an injury. Haaland, Foden, O'Reilly started. O'Reilly played 90 minutes. People were kind of questioning whether he could not start. I have to say, he is 1.93 meters. This is a player who's played exceptionally well for Man City. He's fit and he's young. And I think if you kind of look at Pep's almost philosophy on benching players and playing players, generally speaking, he's always said if someone's young, he can probably play 3 matches in a week, right? So as much as people want to talk about Real Madrid midweek, I think part of it too is Sunderland's have gotten amazing results this season. They drew versus Liverpool, beat Arsenal. Drew versus Liverpool, drew versus Arsenal. Why would Pep disrespect a team like that, especially when they're in a title race? He was obviously going to play his first string team, and he did. So yeah, I mean, there's not much to be said about this. I think it's just don't get overcooked by minutes. There are players who are guaranteed minutes. These are players like Phil Foden. This would include Nico O'Reilly, especially now that Ryan Emery's gone for AFCON. And there's not much else to be said. Like, I think from a tactical point of view, there are certain games where, let's say, they play a team that's maybe a bit more set piece oriented, or second rebound, long ball, win duels in the air, progress from that oriented. And unironically, Nico O'Reilly kind of fits matching up to that. You saw him win a duel within the box, which allowed Guardiola to score in Gameweek 13, and Guardiola scored again in Gameweek 15, which obviously means he still has a set piece threat. But generally speaking, like, him playing that game, I think is a huge plus in terms of thinking where Pep would like to start maybe traditionally an Ake or a Guardiola at a left back position, that he's already comfortable doing Nico O'Reilly or playing Nico O'Reilly within that specific type of frame of game, which is huge. Newcastle versus Burnley. I think it's very unfortunate that people obviously lost a Newcastle clean sheet, but did I enjoy that from a perspective of knowing that people spend a lot of transfers going to Newcastle players? Of course. Did Bruno G score from a corner and Gordon score from a penalty, and that hurt? Yeah, absolutely it did. But I do think the Newcastle run gets worse from here. I mean, that's a no-brainer when you've just come away from Tottenham at home and Burnley at home, and they lost both clean sheets there. So I feel really happy about it. It's very fortunate for me as an owner or a non-owner of Newcastle defenders to see them lose recent clean sheets. And going forward, I think the fixture run becomes a bit more mediocre again, and there's not much to really be said there. Burnley, in an interesting way, I feel like there was an early red card, and so let's see how they progress. Obviously, I've pictured them as one of the worst teams in the league, but some of the recent results were not so bad in terms of like how much they conceded, how many chances they did. It's looked okay so far. Spurs versus Brentford. That was probably a big Spurs game. I think they needed it. For one of the first games where I've seen sort of Spurs dominate a game from start to finish, and actually had really good returns from different players, including Xavi Simons. Their fixture run probably still dictates that we don't own Spurs players, but that was a really poor Brentford away performance. However, of course, the Brentford fixture run pretty much starts from Gameweek 16, so I wouldn't be too worried. They also kind of had to come through a lot of injuries and sort of midweek rest, and I'm not sure. It's certainly not a great Brentford performance, but every team, I guess, is allowed to slip up here and there, especially sort of for the ambitions of Brentford, I suppose. And an interesting change of, I guess, expectations, because I had pictured Spurs to be a much worse team than Brentford, and they quite convincingly beat them. So let's see how Spurs are able to play from here on out, because the concern for them has always been underlying stats have been poor, but this is a good game, right? And that's the start of a potential reversal, if it is anything. Leeds Liverpool. To me, I feel like 3-3 is deserved, but then I also have to think, watching the match, that was a game where as soon as Liverpool conceded that penalty, the entire game capitulated. So, obviously Leeds scored immediately with the stack goal, which was a great chance sort of built through Aronson. But really, it just comes down to, I think, momentum in football. And sometimes you watch a game where Liverpool have complete control, and then suddenly it's just Leeds kind of knew that was a game that they could still insert themselves into, and they did as soon as they got that penalty and scored that, right? Dominic Calvert-Lewin scored. Nemeka, I think, obviously dealing with an injury, but he's an interesting pick, right? As Leeds have 3 good games on the bounce now, I would say, on paper. The next game was Brighton versus West Ham. I thought Brighton were shocking. Brighton did not look good whatsoever within that match, and I think I'm not impressed whatsoever about the Brighton performance for this game, neither the Brighton performance for Aston Villa. It is always ironic that Brighton is the team where, after coming through a tough run of games, they always find a way to play much worse versus teams they're expected to do well versus. At the same time, I kind of have to give credit to both West Ham and Villa. Villa and West Ham have both played really well within recent games. And I'm willing to say probably, my head's kind of turned with West Ham, where I think they just look like a much better side now. And same with Villa. So respect to both teams. That just shows you how quickly my expectations within the Premier League can change. Like I think a few weeks ago, I probably thought, West Ham were so obviously and clearly a team to target on Game Week 13, and I did target them towards an extent. But now, I mean, there's obviously going to be larger fixture gaps. Like for example, City will face West Ham, and that's still probably one of the best games that you could possibly seek from City. And that's the last triple captain Haaland opportunity, I guess. But West Ham looked really solid, and I think from an attacking point of view, solid. And that's it, right? I think Brighton just a bit dismaying, if I can be brutally honest. Fulham versus Palace. I thought Palace were actually really good this game. Fulham just didn't create enough chances, and I think that's kind of been Fulham's season, where it does feel like they're one or two players short. Like they want to play Raul every single minute, probably not. Do they want to play Iwobi every single minute? Probably not. But Wilson looked interesting from a Fulham perspective, and I think he's going to be good for the next three fixture run. Tete is interesting too if you want to double up on Fulham. From a Palace perspective, Guehi, we kind of talked about this from the What We've Learned series, but Guehi seems to be like one of the best set piece attackers in the world this season, and we've probably all been thinking about Gabriel until his injury, but Guehi might take that mantle for me. Just impressive. Other than that, I mean, Richards so far this season has actually been better at DEFCON than Lacroix. So I'm someone who has always been playing Lacroix over Richards. Maybe I'll just change that going forwards. And maybe I won't own the two of them, but it's just an idea where I guess in terms of the pecking order, the Crystal Palace defenders, I'm probably willing to concede that it's now Munoz, Guehi, then Richards, then Lacroix. And I don't think that's too controversial. Neither of them are bad, by the way, including Tyreek Mitchell, I suppose, who's probably within there, but a little bit more expensive. And then Wolves versus Man United, we'll sort of wait for that, but it doesn't impact my plans. And I'll probably keep United players for Bournemouth at home. And if they disappoint me again, well, you know what? I'll be one United short anyways. All right, so we're back here with the My Team pick and rating tool from Fantasy Football Hub. You can find the pick and rating tool yourself within the link in description below. Using the link in description below does support me as well. If you do sign up for the pro tools that Fantasy Football Hub have, plenty of tools that will help you sort of make better decisions in terms of looking at underlying stats for all sorts of players, DEFCON stats, even for example, suggestions of transfers, and then of course the sort of expected points tool, which is always a good check, to see which players you should start every single week with 50-50s, and then even to get suggested transfers for certain players you might want to ship out of your team. So from my perspective, Gameweek 16, I think I've got a wonderful team, but we've got 5 free transfers, and that means that we should be using transfers. The way that I see it is I've got Lacroix and Richards. Probably both of them, or one of them can go, right? One out of the two can go. I think the rest of the team looks really solid because if I can bench Dewsbury Hall for this match, I'm probably happy with the team. Thiago's incredible. Haaland's incredible. Foden, Bruno, Saka, and Mbeumo all look fantastic. And this is going to be the last Mbeumo game. So, whatever he does, if it's probably going to be another blank and 2 price drops, then fair play. I've swindled myself, but he's going to be kept here because when you kind of look at taking Mbeumo out and you look at the transfer suggestions, I really don't think that these are upgrades in the sense that if I go for an Arsenal defender, I'm not getting an upgrade, right? I'm probably going to get an upgrade in the defensive positions from an expected points perspective versus Dewsbury Hall, and therefore benefit from that as opposed to, let's say, using Mbeumo to Rice as a move because, I just don't see why I would sell Mbeumo this week. And then the 2 replacements, which would be Semenyo and Cunha, I mean, why would I want them over Mbeumo in Game Week 16? I just don't. So I'm not going to do an Mbeumo move out, but that probably means that Lacroix Richards can go. So for me, the way I see it is if I do 1 free transfer, I think Richards can go for not Keane, not Ballard, but certainly Vandenberg, right? Because you're kind of looking at Leeds at home as a pretty good game. This is a really good fixture run for Brentford, and you can maximize on that. So that is something of consideration for sure. Maybe a Vandenberg path. The Vandenberg path just simply means that I've got 5 free transfers for next week. So when Mbeumo's gone, I think it comes back down to Rice, Semenyo, Cunha. I don't think I'm really going to go to Rice. I'm probably going to go Semenyo because it's Burnley at home. And honestly, because this is, once again, 1 free transfer every single week, it's not going to hurt my team at all because I think I'll play Vandenberg or God forbid I play Virgil, which I might, over Dewsbury Hall, but I think I will. And then I'll just go into Game Week 18 with 5 free transfers again. So that's 1 transfer path. And it's quite interesting because when you kind of look at the FPL landscape, I just don't think there are a lot of picks that I really like. Like even Semenyo in Game Week 18, this is where the fixtures start to get a bit worse after 18, but rather in 19, right? So I don't even necessarily know what move I would make if I was going to make a move in Game Week 18 here. So it kind of speaks to the fact that in this game, you probably want to be as aggressive as possible. So maybe it's like if Gakpo's fit and available and he's actually playing football, maybe I just move Semenyo to Gakpo here. So that's something that I've actually considered. And that really depends on Gakpo's minutes being perfect. So that's one option. This would always give me hopefully enough money in the bank to upgrade into an Arsenal defender. So, on a week like this, I kind of think that maybe upgrading Lacroix to maybe a Hincapié could make sense because I can't really afford anyone else. But Calafiori should be back as well. So as a defender, like Calafiori could be a pretty good move on a week like this away from Lacroix. This would ship out both of my Palace defenders, which I don't really like. So maybe it's actually an alternative move of maybe just going for an Everton player as well. So for example, here I could look to potentially bin off either Vandenberg or Anderson into just playing an Everton player. So on defense, obviously, I can just go for Michael Keane, which I think is probably like a pretty good move. But as you can see, a lot of FPL for the next few weeks is actually just saying, what is the one free transfer or two free transfers that I can make that will continue to kind of keep my bank of 4 to 5 free transfers at a time? So that's kind of one option. The more aggressive option for me, if I reset this, is actually doing this. I think that I can maybe drop Lacroix once again. I'm thinking of actually going Hincapié. Hincapié should be, one of the best picks over the next few games. And the way that I would afford this is by just going for Gu. Now, with Gu, there's not much to be said because I think as Enes Unal has come back into the Bournemouth team, you're going to start to see less Krupi minutes. Unless I'm wrong and suddenly Krupi starts for Burnley at home and I'm stupid, which is possible. But that's kind of what I think, right? If I go for someone like, let's say, Hincapié, this gives me the best team possible in Gameweek 16. It gets rid of that problem in terms of saying, okay, if I ignore Rice, I can still triple up on Arsenal in a different way in 16. And then in Gameweek 17 here, I make that same move where I move Mbuma out of my team, probably go for Semenyo, and then continue to start rolling my bank of free transfers. This is what I think will be better for myself and a little bit more aggressive. And then when it comes to Game Week 18, we can ask the question about Semenyo once again. Or, of course, if Gakpo doesn't look great, because let's be honest, Gakpo's probably playing an incessant amount of minutes because Slot is in charge. Is Slot going to be in charge at this point in time? I don't know. Maybe if Slot is still in charge, I'll go Gakpo. If Slot is not, then maybe Semenyo stays. And then in week 18 is where I think, okay, Chelsea away is a bad game for Semenyo. This is where I probably part ways with him once again. And then it's going back to players like Cunha, fresh from, I guess, being allowed to play football again because everyone else left for AFCON, or Asobo, who maybe would have served one of his suspensions, or, God forbid I go Gakpo, who hasn't looked great, to be honest, but actually is allowed to play football by Slot. So these are the types of transfers that I could be making right now. But I think the most simple idea here in terms of a transfer plan is just going for Hincapié. Hincapié is much less expensive than Timber. It gives me flexibility in that I've got 0.8 in the bank. Yes, of course, I use 2 free transfers as opposed to 1, but I don't think a security blanket of 4 free transfers has ever been a problem in FPL. I don't ever see myself really having to use 5 free transfers within one game week. Otherwise, something's gone brutally wrong within the game. So that's kind of where my thoughts are in terms of FPL. So let me know what your thoughts are too. These are my transfer plans. As I said, I think I'm going to lock in the moves. The benefit of the Gu move is Delap is actually out for 6 to 8 weeks. So maybe we'll actually be able to even, rely on some Gu minutes in the future. Not that that really means anything, but just something to think about. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.